Hi, everyone. It's Bev Janisch here, and I am here with Kelly Hendershot. Kelly has a master's degree in social work and is a senior director of programs for the cancer support community. And I had the privilege of interviewing Kelly about her journey through the dark night of the soul, and I realized she had a really powerful story to share. What stood out the most for me was how the challenging time in her life really opened the door for her to respond to a deeper calling to shift from a career path in marketing to social work. So, in today's discussion, we're going to explore what it means to respond to a deeper calling within ourselves and how we discern the difference between whether we're feeding our fearful ego, or as I often call it, our small self, or whether we're honoring our soul. So, welcome, Kelly. I'm super happy and grateful to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so it's great to see you. And we're going to just start right off with some questions. So, really, the first thing I would love to ask you is, can you tell us about the 180-degree turn that you made in your career and what triggered that shift?
Yeah, so a lot of friends and family kind of thought I was crazy, I think, when this happened initially. But for some background, my husband was diagnosed with cancer. It was terminal about 3 months after we got married. And we found some really great support from at this place called Gilda's Club. And this is when we were living in the Quad Cities. We were living in Milan, Illinois at the time. And Gilda's Club was a place where we could go for support groups. Justin was in one group in what they call the wellness group to talk to other people with cancer diagnosis. And I was in what was called the family group to receive support from other family members who had a loved one with cancer. And I remember during those support group meetings, I was just really impressed by Melissa, who facilitated my group. She would hear all of our crummy stories about how we were dealing with kind of like the overwhelming feeling that you get as a caregiver with a cancer in the family. And she'd come in with a smile. She'd always seem kind of cheery. And she'd always kind of call me out. She'd give me that look like, Kelly, you look like you've got something on your mind. I'm like, darn it, how'd she do that? I have to talk now. And I was just really impressed by how she carried us through these heavy discussions that would happen. Sometimes were lighter than others, but there were some really heavy conversations in that group. And I remember at the time telling Justin, I wish I could do something like Missy's doing. She just seems so happy. She seems to really enjoy what she's doing. I'm like, I like my job. I'm good about it, but I'm not loving it. I don't have that passion for marketing that I used to have. And that perspective shift happened with this cancer diagnosis. I was always very driven, that saying about working your way up the corporate ladder, that was me. But through these support groups, I recognized something was missing. And Justin said, well, let's focus on me for now, which of course we were going to. And he's like, but then we focus on you and getting you a new career path. I kept making comments to Missy, like, how do I be you? And at first she'd laugh it off. I'm like, no, really, how do I be like you someday? I really admire what you're doing. And after Justin died, this was just shy of 2 years after his diagnosis, about 19 months later, I told Melissa, I'm like, no, seriously, what do I do to be you someday? So we had a really good conversation about what it would look like to have a job at Gilda's Club, what the requirements were, because when I said, what do I do to be you someday? That was my point of reference, just what she was doing in our group. So she said that the educational background required a licensed mental health professional. So I could get my master's in social work, psychology, counseling, a relative field. And social work just clicked with me because Melissa was a social worker. I also was really inspired by Lisa, who was our hospice social worker when it was getting towards the end of Justin's life. So I decided to devote 3 years of my life as a part-time master's of social work student. And at that time, I had friends and family saying, why are you doing this again? Are you doing this just to volunteer at Gilda's Club? I'm like, well, not to volunteer, but I'd like to facilitate groups because I want to give back for the great support that I received. And it was just really inspiring to me. So I went through 3 years of, why are you doing this again? I don't quite understand it. You make good money now. You're not going to make any money once you switch jobs, which is true. But as soon as I got my first position at Gilda's Club, all my friends and family were like, oh, I get it now. This makes sense.
Wow, that is so, so powerful. So how did you, I know when we talked before, you said that at the time that you knew that you wouldn't be happy because you were grieving,
Mhm.
but that you also wanted to feel passionate and alive again. Can you just say more about those different, that inner wisdom that you had between holding both of those at the same
Yeah,
time?
sure. So, you know, my husband, who I was just starting off the rest of my life with, dying 19 months, well, just short of 2 years into our marriage, um, I knew I wasn't going to be happy, like what most people think of as happy, and that I would struggle to smile and laugh for quite a while after his death. Um, but I knew that I didn't feel fulfilled either. I should say I did take a good 3 weeks off work after his death and had plenty of time to start to contemplate this. We worked at the same place at the time. Our employer was great. They gave me a lot of support, but there were constant reminders that Justin wasn't there anymore. And so I eventually made the decision to leave that job about a year after he died. But at this time, I had started putting in my application work for social work. And I had a lot of great advisors who said, this can't be a knee-jerk reaction to your grief. You have to make sure that you can actually deal with it, especially if you want to do something at Gilda's Club someday. You're going to have constant reminders of what cancer and the not so positive outlooks of cancer can look like, especially if there's other people who come in with terminal diagnoses. So I took that into consideration a lot. Decided I'm just going to sign up there. It doesn't hurt me if I need to drop out of this. So Justin died in May 2009. It was October of 2010 that I started my social work program. By that time, I had a new job. They knew I was going to school to get my master's in social work. So I felt like even though, again, I was happy and good at my job, not super passionate about it, but I knew that was coming down the road with what I was doing with my education.
Mm.
So I kind of put happiness on pause until I could start to feel that naturally. But I knew that pursuing my passion was something that I could work on even as I was working on my grief.
Wow, that is just so beautiful and powerful and inspiring. And so can you say a bit more about how you were able to discern that difference between kind of your grief and your kind of the small self fearful part of you and the deeper knowing that arises from a soul, a deeper sense of ourselves? Can you just talk about the difference between those two?
Sure. And I'd say I was not really, I didn't realize what I was going through in the moment. I just had a gut reaction, a gut feeling that, no, this is right. Despite all the questions I got about, why are you doing this again? Are you sure it's worth it? I knew in my heart and my gut it was right. It wasn't. I did start meditating while I was working at Gilda's Club. It was a service we offered, so I'm one to practice what I preach. So I got into a habit of doing more like app-based meditation. It wasn't until the start of the pandemic that I started doing some of my own meditation. I always struggled with how to do that in the past.
Mhm.
So I have this great instructor, Angela Swanson, and over the course of learning how to meditate through her, joining her weekly meditation sessions that she provides, we've had a book club. And one of the books was your book. And that's when I first learned what the small self was. And I just had an aha moment during the book club discussion. Like, that's exactly what I went through. I knew that there was a ton of reasons for me to just stay in the safe, cushy career path that I was going down, where I had extra income and security, financial stability, I should say. But I decided to listen to my small self and really go for what I knew would ultimately make me happy.
Wow. So at the time, you really weren't discerning, okay, the difference between this deep inner knowing and the soul and the wisdom
No.
and the fearful and the fear that sounds like you had a lot of fear coming from other people as well, questioning. So not only did you have your own doubts about
Absolutely.
following this path that from a logical perspective, does this make sense? Is this grief? But you had this fear coming on top of it from other people. So you're navigating your own fear and doubt. You're navigating other people's fear and doubt. That must have been a strong energy that you had within you that was just urging you, compelling you. So how did
Yeah.
you navigate? What would you say about that? How would you navigate that fear, that doubt that was both inside you and from others?
I'm always I'm the type of person, I do pros and cons list. It takes me a while to make a decision. But in my coaching with Angela, I realized, I say this about myself, but I almost always go back to that kind of like gut and heart reaction when it comes to
Mhm.
making a decision, like I did with my master's program. And I also recall the fear creeping back in the first time I was offered it was a part-time position initially, and that was an easy yes at Gilda's Club. But then I was offered a full-time position, which meant a $15,000 pay cut. And I'm like, oh, I don't know if I'm quite ready for this. I thought I'd have time to pay off my student loans a little bit more. I'm like, am I going to hate myself if I turn this down? And they said, well, the turnover is pretty low here. So we don't know when there would be another chance. I'm like, all right, that's it. I can't miss this opportunity. But I put myself through a lot of turmoil trying to decide, can I financially afford this? Is it the right thing for me? Do I need to wait? When all along, my heart was telling me to say yes. And that's what I ultimately listened to anyway. The same thing happened when I took my position with Cancer Support Community. So Gilda's Club is an affiliate of where I work now. I work for the headquarters of Cancer Support Community. But it was kind of that same internal fear and turmoil. Where do I want to move across the country? I had been living in Iowa at the time, and now I live in Arlington, Virginia. Did I want to go through that? Did I want to uproot my life? And I knew I was far enough in my grief journey that I didn't need to stay tied to the Quad Cities. That's where Justin grew up. That's where we lived once we decided we were something and wanted to find out what we really were. So there was a lot of those fear moments, but ultimately I kept going back to my initial heart and gut reactions in every one of those instances, I realized.
Wow, you just described so beautifully that the way you navigated different ways of knowing, how you integrated your mind and thinking things through, you tuned into your heart, you listened to your body or your gut, and that's really that's really powerful to have really been able to integrate and pull those three things together
Mhm.
that then became the force. It sounds like to move forward in spite of your fear.
Yeah. And
So
that driving force
inspiring.
is it. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're both really obviously into meditation, me as a teacher, you as you practice meditation. That came a bit later in the journey for you. But what role has meditation or some type of that inner practice, whether it's meditation or some inner practice, played in staying in alignment with your deeper sense of your truth and your
It's just
path?
given me so much more awareness of what's going on around me. And meditation, I've had doctors tell me for years, practice yoga, practice meditation. You need to work on the stress in your life. I'm like, whatever. Just because it wasn't the right time for me to try those things. And eventually I practice yoga, I practice meditation, both on a regular basis now. And it makes me more aware of what's happening around me instead of what's happening to me, if
Oh,
that makes a little bit of sense.
yeah.
Um, so now I can think back about this thought that I needed to become a social worker, and realize that I was able to tune out those extra voices. Like we tune things out in meditation. And I should say I had a lot of great support from family and friends. Yes, they questioned, but they're good family and friends. So they would question
Yeah.
what I'm doing, especially since I couldn't really explain it well at the time. Um, so I think I've also become aware of just the need to be open to new opportunities. And as soon as I kind of made that my intent earlier in 2020, um, that's when this job possibility came up. I was not looking for a new job. I was not looking to move. I just said I'm going to be open to new opportunities. I knew that Gilda's Club and the cancer support community meant a lot to me. So I knew early on that that was my long-term game plan. I didn't realize that that meant taking me away from the Quad Cities and to the opposite side of the coast where I don't have a lot of immediate family. I have some extended family, but my immediate family is all back in the Midwest.
So very inspiring, and how you described how you set the intention and you didn't know what in how the universe was going to respond or what that really meant, but it revealed itself to you.
Mhm.
So I would just love for you to share as well with others, what words of wisdom do you have for others who may be either, in a space where it might be a challenging time, or they're feeling called to grow and change, even if they're not exactly sure what that's going to look like or what it all means. What advice might you have from, or wisdom from going through your journey?
Yeah, I think it's just have that willingness to pivot and see what happens next when a new opportunity presents itself. The other thing that meditation has given me, and I kind of advise for others, is it doesn't have to be perfect. I've let go of a lot of perfection. I've always been a really high strung perfectionist, but meditating has kind of given me a chance to pause and just take a breath and realize what's important versus what I'm just overdoing it with perfection. And I think some of that strive for perfection is what maybe kept me away from some possible opportunities in the past because I was so focused on getting something right. I might have missed an opportunity that was right in front of me. So just being kind of open and reflective on where things can take you.
Mm. So before we close, is there anything else that you would like to share with people before we close our chat?
Yeah, just getting back to meditation. It doesn't have to be a really long, involved process. I only meditate 10 minutes a day every morning. But I can tell you, I feel it later in the day if I miss that 10 minutes first thing in the morning. I'll kind of just notice I'm feeling off or just feel a tension in my shoulders and be like, what's going on with me? I don't feel right. I'm like, oh, I didn't meditate this morning. Let's take a few breaths before we go into this next meeting here. So I take a lot more mindful moments throughout the day too, where I just might close my eyes, take a few deep breaths, not even go into full meditation mode, but just some quiet reflection time has been really helpful to me. So just because somebody meditates a certain way doesn't mean that you have to do the exact same thing. So I think a lot of people don't realize that there's more flexibility. There's not a right and wrong way to meditate. There's just the willingness and openness. There's that word again, the
Yeah,
openness to give it a try.
right. That is really, I think, super helpful advice and wisdom from your experience, and I'm sure a lot of people can really relate to. So, in closing, I just really want to thank you so much for sharing your journey. It's so inspirational hearing how you went through a very, very, very painful time, but how that also opened the door for you to be of service in this world and be a gift to others and make a difference. And we're all deeply grateful for that. So, we're grateful you've shared your story and your inspiration. And yeah, thanks for being with us here
Yeah,
today. So
thanks again
bye
for
for
having me.
now.